Choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The Bible tells us that God created us in his image. And one of the ways that God created us in his image was to give us free will. We are free to love him and serve him, because love is not real if it is not freely chosen. But God has also given us his law. His law. His commandments are there to protect us. They are like guardrails as we careen down the road of life, keeping us from crashing and burning over the side. That's what God's law is for. But we still have freedom. We're free to follow them or reject them. But our choices have consequences, both in this life and in eternity. God has given us free will, but he holds us accountable for our choices. The reading today from Joshua makes this choice clear. We must choose this day whom we will serve. The consequences of this choice are spelled out at the end of Deuteronomy. Just before the Israelites entered the promised land, Moses gave them his farewell address before he died. We find it in chapters 27 through 30 of Deuteronomy. Now, Moses had carefully transmitted in great detail God's law to the people. And in his farewell address, he wanted to drive home for the last time the serious nature of the covenant that God was making with them. And so he framed it in terms of a clear either-or choice. Either-or choice. He said in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19, he said, I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life, that you and your descendants may live. A few chapters before that, in Deuteronomy chapter 28, Moses lists the blessings and the curses. Chapter 28 of Deuteronomy. There are 12 curses and there are 6 blessings. Now, the curses pretty much follow the 10 Commandments. For example, okay, here's what it says. It says, and Moses charged the people that same day, saying, when you have passed over the Jordan, remember, this is before they enter the promised land. He's preparing them to enter the promised land. He won't go with them. He's going to die before they enter. And he wants them to be fully prepared. So this is his farewell address. It's Joshua that took them into the promised land and led them during the conquest. But this is what Moses says. When you have passed over the Jordan, these shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless the people. And then he lists a bunch of names, and these are the Levites. And then he goes on, and the Levites shall declare to all the men of Israel with a loud voice. And then he lists the 12 curses. And for example, cursed be the man who makes a graven or molten image. Well, what's that? That's first commandment, right? So he's just putting it in more direct, powerful terms in a curse. But it's the same 10 Commandments we have, and we find that. So there's a prohibition against idolatry, against dishonoring your parents, dishonoring your father and mother, against perverting justice. Cursed be he who perverts justice due to the sojourner and the widow and the orphan. There's more than one, by the way, curse against sexual immorality because of the importance of sexual purity. And then there's murder and bribery. And he ends with, "Cursed be he who does not confirm the words of this law by doing them." And all the people shall say, "Amen." But he's not done there, okay? That is the guardrail. But then he gives the blessings. Because remember, he said, here's your choice, die or live. And here's the blessings. And there are 6 blessings, and they're beautiful blessings. "Blessed shall you be in the city. Blessed shall you be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of your body, and the fruit of your ground, and the fruit of your beasts, and the increase of your cattle. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading trough. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out." And then the real kicker here, the real important one, is the Lord will cause your enemies who rise against you to be defeated before you. Remember, they're going to go in to conquer the land. "They shall come out against you one way and flee before you 7 ways. The Lord will establish you as a people. The Lord will establish you as a people holy to himself, as he has sworn to you, if you keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways." Moses knew that the welfare and the destiny of the Israelites in the Promised Land depended on the choices they would make once they got there. And that is, in fact, what happened. As we read then through the book of Joshua, we see in the book of Joshua that the success or failure of the people of Israel in battle had everything to do with whether they were obeying God or not. For example, the first town, the first city they conquered was Jericho. And the people were successful in the Battle of Jericho because they perfectly followed the seemingly nonsensical instructions, the battle plan. Remember the battle plan of Jericho? You're going to march around it 7 days in a row. And then on the 7th day, you're going to march around it 7 times. And then you're going to shout and the walls will fall down. It's a heck of a battle plan. But they obeyed it, and they were successful. But there was a little problem they didn't know about, because after the victory, part of the deal was that everything, this was holy war, and so everything in the city, you can't loot like is typical in warfare. Take what you want, and that's how the soldiers get paid. Everything had to be devoted. Everything had to be destroyed. It's like this is wipe the Canaanite idolaters clear the land. And unfortunately, after the victory, there was a man named Achan, son of Carmi, and he took from Jericho some of the spoil. He hid it away in a bag, and then he took it to his tent. And because of his disobedience after the Battle of Jericho, in the next battle they were in, they were defeated. And it was not until Achan and his family and all the stolen goods were destroyed that the covenant with God was restored. That's how it works. That's how it works in God's holy war. The reading we have today is from the very end of the book of Joshua. It's Joshua's farewell speech shortly before his death. And it's very similar to Moses' farewell speech. Joshua, like Moses, assembled all the tribes of Israel and reminded them of the faithfulness of God through the Exodus and through the entire time he had led them in the Promised Land. They had been successful most of the time. And like Moses, Joshua laid before them a choice. In the reading today, you heard him. He said, "Choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. You're free. Some people might choose them, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Like Moses, Joshua knew that the welfare of his people in the promised land after he was gone would depend on the choices they made in the future. See, God created us with free will, but he also gave us his law. His commandments are there to protect us. They're guardrails. But we're free to follow those guardrails or try to jump them and go our own way. But our choices have consequences, both in this life and in eternity. And when we follow God's law, we flourish. And when we break God's law, we perish. And unfortunately, most people in America today don't want to hear that. The freedom God gives us to become holy, to become saints, has become corrupted into license to sin. In fact, in America, as we all know, we're living in a period of extreme moral breakdown and rejection of the laws of God. People are jumping those guardrails all the time, and crashing and burning too, by the way. But this has not always been true in America. Let me tell you a story about George Washington. On April 30, 1789, George Washington was sworn in as the first president of the United States. The oath was administered by Robert Livingston. He was the Chancellor of New York. And they stood on a second-floor balcony in Federal Hall in New York City. Below them, the streets were packed. There was a crowd of people who wanted to witness this historic event, which was the swearing in of the first president of the United States. And at that infinitely important moment, marking the birth of the American Republic, Senator William McClay, he was a senator from Pennsylvania, he was there, he was watching it, and he took notes in his journal. And he wrote in his journal that even the great General Washington, who bravely and steadfastly and unflinchingly faced the armies of Britain in battle, George Washington was trembling. He was trembling at the significance, the import of what was about to happen, at the gravity of it. And McClay wrote this. He said, "This great man was agitated at that moment more than ever he was by the leveled cannon or the pointed musket." So he was more disturbed, trembling more than he was going into battle against the British armies. And this is what's important, because when Washington laid his hand on the Bible to swear his oath, he opened it, and guess where he put his hand when he swore the oath? Deuteronomy chapter 28. The blessings and the curses. Like Moses and Joshua before him, George Washington knew that the fledgling American nation that was being born that day must be founded upon the strictest biblical principles. In his inaugural address, he said, quote, "The propitious smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right which heaven itself has ordained." Washington understood very well that the American colonies were built full of people who had fled religious persecution to establish a new nation where they could worship God in freedom. That was the original American dream, and it was a spiritual vision. based on biblical principles. And God blessed it. God blessed it. And for many generations, America was indeed an oasis of freedom for millions of people from around the world. But today, more than 230 years later, that American idea of freedom under God has been perverted 180 degrees from a spiritual vision to a fleshly vision, a worldly one, from worshiping God freely to defying God utterly to his face. The American dream has actually become hostile to Washington's founding vision, and for that reason, the American dream is dying. Almost everything in our culture today is antagonistic to Christian values. Our culture teaches our children that emotion is more important than reason, that happiness is a right, not a blessing, that freedom means that we can define our own truth any way we want, even if it defies reality. And none of these notions is consistent with truth, with natural law, or with biblical teaching. And yet, we know that anyone who disagrees with this program, this narrative, is punished. And so that puts ordinary faithful Catholics like us at odds with our prevailing culture. And meanwhile, explicit opposition to the Catholic Church is increasing every day. Pope St. John Paul II called the culture we live in today the culture of death. And in this culture of death, we must always choose. We must always choose. Choose life. Choose whom we serve. It's exactly as Moses described it when he said, I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life that you and your descendants may live. Friends, we must return to our biblical roots. We need to fast, we need to pray, we need to act. We need to relentlessly and zealously hold fast to our Catholic values, no matter how much pushback we get. We need to support human life from conception to natural death, and we need to do everything we can to support classical education in Catholic families. And we also need to do what we can to help those trying to stop toxic anti-family legislation in Maryland. Above all, we must remain steadfast in our Catholic faith. God is not mocked. If we choose idols or serve only ourselves and not our God, our nation will fall. I will give the last word now to Joshua. Quote, now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in faithfulness. Put away the gods which your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. Choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. All angels and saints of heaven, pray for us.